Hey everyone, welcome to Dialectics Hour. We're here covering Marx's Capital Volume 1, and we finally made it through the first chapter. Finally, it took us, I think, 7 episodes to get there, but now we're finally on Chapter 2, which is about the process of exchange. And so this is a relatively short chapter compared to Chapter 1, so maybe we can get through the whole thing within the hour. Um, but I think I will just go ahead and get started. Let me pull it open in the German here and bookmark it real quick, and I'm going to pull up the text. All right, so chapter 2, the process of exchange. Commodities cannot themselves go to market and perform exchanges in their own right. Now notice this was something that was missing in the last chapter. We weren't talking about the people who were actually engaging in the exchange. We were just talking about one commodity and another commodity meeting themselves in the market. We didn't really talk about the activity of the people. We talked about the commodity and what's being exchanged, right? There's this trading of one form of labor for another form of labor. We haven't brought the people in to play yet. So we must therefore have recourse to their guardians, who are the possessors of commodities. Guardians is interesting here. It reminds me of something like Plato's Republic, right, where there's like the guardians of the Republic. The German word for guardian there is Hüter, which I'm not familiar with that word, so let me go ahead and check that up real quick. Type it in the dictionary. Custodian, guardian, keeper. Commodities are things, and therefore lack the power to resist man. If they are unwilling, he can use force. In other words, he can take possession of them. Marx, I think here being a little bit dramatic, but we have a footnote here. In the 12th century, so renowned for its piety, very delicate things. Volume working okay? Very delicate things often appear among these commodities. Thus, a French poet of the period enumerates among the commodities to be found in the fair of Landy, alongside clothing, shoes, leather, implements of cultivation, skins, etc. Also, fond de feuilles de le crop, went and women. So you can buy whores, basically, is what he's saying. I guess I don't know. It sounds it's a or I don't know. Traffic people, traffic human beings. I'm not sure what's. It's a little bit tongue in cheek, I guess, about that, but okay. In order that these objects may enter into relationship with each other as commodities, their guardians must place themselves in relation to one another as persons whose will resides in these objects. That's from Hegel's philosophy of right, I believe, where property is like you're placing your will into something. Okay. So the objects to enter in relationship, the guardians place themselves in relation to one another as persons whose will resides in these objects and must behave in such a way that each does not appropriate the commodity of the other and alienate his own except through an act which both parties consent. So this is setting up like a kind of very basic, almost like Lockean, although I think he's drawing off the philosophy of right by Hegel here, kind of exchange through mutual consent, through contract. The guardians must therefore recognize each other as owners of private property. This judicial relation, whose form is the contract, whether as part of the developed legal system or not, is a relation between two wills, which mirrors the economic relation. So the economic relation, I would imagine, would be like the value form, the exchange relation that we've been talking about in the previous chapter. But now we have a relationship between two wills. The content of this juridical relation, the relation of two wills, is itself determined by the economic relation. Right, so the wills would be this juridical relation. So we have a kind of base and superstructure situation going on here. So for those who are not familiar, although I imagine most people coming this far would be familiar, in Marxism you have the economic base and then the superstructure, which is like the law, the state, ideology, things like that. And so there's a juridical relationship between wills, between contract, and that itself is based in this economic relation. We have a footnote here. Proudhon creates his ideal of justice, of justice éternelle, from the juridical relations that correspond to the production of commodities. How long is this footnote? Anyway, so there's a critique of Proudhon here. I think I'm going to skip it over. But is this like to the... A lot of French words in here. Proudhon fucked up, apparently. Okay, so the content of this juridical relation, or relation of two wills, is itself determined by the economic relation. Here the persons exist for one another, merely as representatives, and hence owners of commodities. So there's this whole Hegelian kind of idea of like people representing or existing for each other, like having a being for other, I think here. Curious if there's actually that language here. Not really. Die Personen existieren hier nur voreinander als Repräsentanten von Ware und daher als Warenbesitzer. So pretty straightforward translation. As we proceed to develop our investigation, we shall find in general that the characters who appear on the economic stage, Mr. Shakespeare here, Marx loved his Shakespeare, but we have, characters appearing on the economic stage are merely personifications of economic relations. The bearers, it is as the bearers of these economic relations that they come into contact with each other. Okay, so this is something that Marx alludes to in the preface, which we talked about in session 0. It's the bearers here, the Träger. And so, okay, so Träger, so like tragen in German is like to wear, but also like a Träger is like someone who like bears something, carries something, but also can play a role. And so what Marx is talking about here is that we're not talking about real individuals. We're talking about the roles that people play in society and the logic of those different roles. And so the people on stage here, right? So he's like kind of setting up a stage, setting up a play, as it were, of actors engaged in exchange. And the people on the economic stage, they're wearing like almost like a mask, a certain role, and playing a certain role. And that tells us about the roles that people play in society. And as he says in the preface, do I have my physical copy? Dropped it over here. Looking up some things. I've been more active on TikTok lately, so I've been talking, gauging on some textual discussions on there. So in the first preface, he says, I'll just jump to it real quick. To prevent possible misunderstandings, let me say this. I do not by any means depict the capitalist and the landowner in rosy colors, but individuals are dealt with here only so far as they are the personifications of economic categories, as the bearers, the Träger, of particular class relations and interests. My standpoint, from which the development of economic formation of society is viewed as a process of natural history, can less than any other make the individual responsible for relations whose creature he remains, socially speaking, however much he subjectively may raise himself above them. So, like he said here, he's treating these people as playing different roles. And similarly here, we're looking at the economic stage. We're looking at the roles people play. Individuals might, be, you can, I think I mentioned this in the first episode or the 0th episode, that, there is an objective difference between a landlord who's an asshole and a landlord who's like, nice to you, but he's still a landlord, right? So it's about the roles that they're playing. It's not necessarily the individual. Okay. What chiefly distinguishes a commodity from its owner is the fact that every other commodity counts for it only as the form of appearance of its own value. So here we have that word again that I've been talking about, the Erscheinungsform, right? So exchange value is the Erscheinungsform of value. And so what distinguishes a commodity from its owner, from the person who owns the commodity, is that for, I guess, for that owner, you might say, every other commodity counts for it only as the form of appearance of its own value. So if I have a commodity, right, like I got a pair of Jordans that I've been saving for a while, then that commodity is a form of appearance for all the things that I could buy after I sell my Jordans, more or less. A born leveler and cynic, it is always ready to exchange not only soul but body with each and every other commodity, be it more repulsive than Maritornes herself. A character from Cervantes' Don Quixote, which I've never read Don Quixote, so I don't actually know the character here, but I'm guessing it's ugly chick or something. I don't know. All right. So the owner makes up for this lack in the commodity of a sense of the concrete physical body of the other commodity by his own 5 and more senses. Okay, let me read that. The owner makes up for this lack in the commodity of a sense of the concrete physical body of the other commodity by his own 5 and more senses. For the owner, his commodity possesses no direct use value, right? So if I have the Jordans and I'm hanging on to them because I want to sell them later and buy some stuff, I'm not wearing them. I'm using the Jordans example. I feel like I'm like talking to my students, you know. But all right, because I would use like tennis shoes in school because I can relate to that. But otherwise, he would not bring it to the market, right? So by bringing it to the market, it's something I want to sell. Don't, you know, the Scarface thing. Don't get high on your own supply, right? You know, it doesn't have use value for you if you're trying to make money off of it. All right, so it has use value for others, but for himself, its only direct use value is as a bearer of exchange value, and consequently a means of exchange. All right, so if you have stuff to sell, you're not trying to like use that, you know, your own supply. You're trying to get rid of that supply for some money. All right. We have a note to Aristotle, Republic. For twofold is the use of every object. The one is peculiar to the object as such, the other is not, as a sandal, which may be worn, and is also exchangeable. Both are uses of the sandal, for even he who exchanges the sandal for the money or food he is in need of makes use of the sandal as a sandal, but not in its natural way, for it has not been made for the sake of being exchanged. So Aristotle, not bad, Aristotle. All right. He therefore makes up his mind to sell it in return for commodities whose use value is of service to him. All right, so that's the whole idea behind exchange. I have use values that I don't need, so I'm going to exchange them for the use values I do need. All commodities are non-use values for their owners and use values for their non-owners. So now we're starting to see a dialectic, right? What is a non-use value to me is a use value to someone else, and vice versa. Consequently, they must all change hands. But this changing of hands constitutes their exchange, and their exchange puts them in relation to each other as values and realizes them as values. Right, so there's this whole thing of the realization of value and the exchange. Let's see what the word there is. Yeah, so it's actually just realisieren. So just literally realize. But I was wondering, there's another word in German, verwirklicht, which is like actualize, but sometimes translated realize. So hence commodities must be realized as values before they can be realized as use values. Yep, so you can't, you know, you have to trade them for something before they can be used. On the other hand, they must stand the test as use values before they can be realized as values. And here we get to this important thing of useful labor. For the labor expended on them only counts insofar as it is expended in a form which is useful for others, right? So if I make something with my labor and nobody needs it, can't realize it, right? So it has value maybe, but it's not a useful item. However, only the act of exchange can prove whether that labor is useful for others, and its product consequently capable of satisfying the needs of others. The owner of a commodity is prepared to part with it only in return for other commodities whose use value satisfies his own need. So far, exchange is merely an individual process for him. On the other hand, he desires to realize his commodity as a value in any other suitable commodity of the same value. It does not matter to him whether his own commodity has any use value for the owner of the other commodity or not. From this point of view, exchange is for him a general social process. But the same process cannot be simultaneously for all owners of commodities, both exclusively individual and exclusively social in general. So we have what might be the hint of a contradiction. So let's back up for a second. Okay. So there's the individual process. And that's that the owner has their own need. They're looking for use values that satisfy their own need. And they only want those commodities. And then there's the general social process, right? And so general and individual are also opposites. Let's actually look at that in German too. Sorry. Should be right there, I thought. Okay, here it is. Yeah, so it's individueller. So that's like individual, because sometimes particular, either bestimmt or besonders or Besonderheit, like these are sometimes confused in translation because there are distinct categories in Hegel. So individual, singular, meaning one, not some, not a collection of, but like actually one, versus general. And then here that's allgemein, so universal, quite literally, or general. All right, so on the other hand, he desires to realize his commodity as a value in any other suitable commodity. It does not matter for him whether his own commodity has any use value for the owner of the other commodity or not. From this point of view, it's social. So it's social from the standpoint of not caring about the other owner and what they want. It's individual, but then there's the social aspect of giving the commodities to the other people kind of without caring about it. But then the individual is that you're only looking for the commodity you need. All right, so then Marx says, but it can't be exclusively individual and exclusively social and general. So he says, let's take a closer look. To the owner of a commodity, every other commodity counts as the particular equivalent of his own commodity. So that's actually particular as a logical category, like some. Besonders. I want to see if there's anything else in the language that's interesting here. Okay, so from the perspective of the owner of a commodity, every other commodity counts as the particular equivalent of his own commodity. Hence, his own commodity is the universal equivalent for all the others. Right? So now that's introducing that logic that we developed in the third section of chapter 1. So universal equivalent was money, right? But like this comes out of this dialectic where like I have something I can trade for all of these different things. So all of these different things are worth the one thing. And then out of that, that generates into money. So Marx is like following that same dialectic again. So if my commodity is worth all these other commodities, then all those other commodities express themselves in my commodity as the universal equivalent. But since this applies to every owner, and I think this was something that was hinted at but not carried out in chapter 1, there is in fact no commodity acting as universal equivalent. That's interesting too. and the commodities possess no general relative form of value under which they can be equated as values and have the magnitude of their values compared. So the relative form, just to remember, is like the thing that you're trading, and then the equivalent is like what you're getting. Generally speaking, that might be a rough way of putting it, but that's just to like jog your memory. That's not to give a scientific answer of what it is. So I might have to go back and look at what the general relative form, if that term came up in chapter 1. It'd be interesting to just like, I'll just flag it because we want to continue going, but it would be interesting to go do a close reading of this paragraph based on chapter 1 again. But basically what he's saying is like, I have this thing, it's worth all these other things, so all those other things are worth this thing. But all those other people on the market, they have their things, and those are worth all the other things. So there's like a sense in where we don't have money yet. We don't have money as the money does act as the universal equivalent, but at this point we don't have money again because I think he's building back up that framework that he developed earlier, because he's saying commodities possess no general relative form of value under which they've been equated as values and have the magnitude of their values compared. But I don't think money was listed as the general relative form of value. If so, that's something. I believe that money is a universal equivalent. I've just never seen that phrase or noticed the phrase general relative form before. But I would assume like a money can be on either side of it, so maybe it is the general relative form too. Yeah, I think that the money might be both a relative form and a general form, but I'd have to go look at that. Or sorry, both a relative form and an equivalent form, but I have to go double check that. Anyways, that's a tangent. So therefore, they definitely do not confront each other as commodities, but as products or use values only. That's interesting. Oh, sorry. Yeah, this is a very strange claim. So, like, when bartering, they're not confronting each other as commodities because they can't be measured in money. I have to think more about it, and maybe it will develop more as the reading goes on. But that's not a claim that I would have to think about. That's a claim I'd have to think about a little bit more. Okay. In their difficulties, our commodity owners think like Faust. In the beginning was the deed. Im Anfang war die Tat. They have therefore already acted before thinking. The natural laws of the commodity have manifested themselves in the natural instinct of the owners of commodities. They can only bring their commodities into a relation as values, and therefore commodities, by bringing them into an opposing relation with some one other commodity which serves as a universal equivalent. So here's this whole like logic of dialectical opposition going on here too. We've already reached that result by our analysis of the commodity. But only the action of society can turn a particular commodity into the universal equivalent, right? So this is the idea that there's a sense in which there's a debate about whether Marx has a commodity theory of money, and I haven't gone into the weeds of it. I just have come across it. But there's a sense in which money is not just a commodity. In fact, in Grundrisse, Marx says that it's both a commodity and a non-commodity. But it's society, it's only society and its action that can make something into money, if that makes sense. The social action of all other commodities, therefore, sets apart the particular commodity in which they all represent their values. This is interesting too, because he's still like personifying commodities. So like, as much as like Marx warns us against fetishism in the end of chapter 1, where fetishism is where you treat relationships between people as relationships between things, which is how things appear to us. Right? Like, it seems like the commodities have value, but really it's just labor being traded. Marx loves to use this language of treating commodities in a fetishized form. Because in a way he says like we can never get rid of fetishism under a commodity producing economy. So the social action of all other commodities, that's what's bringing about money. Therefore, sets apart the particular commodity which they all represent their values. And so the particular becomes universal here, I think. Right? Let's see. So particular be the opposite, like some as opposed to all. We'll double check the German here. Bestimmte. So bestimmte is a word that can mean particular as a logical category, but it can also be determinate. The natural form of this commodity thereby becomes the socially recognized equivalent form. The natural form being the use value becomes the socially recognized equivalent form. Through the agency of the social process, it becomes the specific social function of the commodity, which has been set apart to be the universal equivalent. It thus becomes money. Illum unum concilium haben et virtuum et potentium. I love this fucking like spell here. So yeah, he's quoting the Vulgate in Latin. And it's, these have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast, and that no man may buy or sell save that he had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name, right? So he mentions money and then he brings up the number of the beast, right? Which is it's a classic thing in like old lefty texts, right? There's like if you read like the English peasant stuff, there's all this like number of the beast stuff. I've always loved that. It's just like he's like casting a spell or something. He's like, I'm gonna read the Vulgate in Latin here. As soon as I mention it, thus becomes money. Yeah, so I don't know. I think Marx and Engels were like the funniest German speakers in history, perhaps. Like, they're just sitting around cracking jokes all the time, and you read them, they're really funny. You read Marx write about Proudhon and the poverty philosophy, and he's just, like, making quips and attacks. Lenin's like that, too. A lot of, like, Marxists are really, really good at, like, quips and polemics and making fun of their opponents, and it's a lost art. Although, I don't know, if you read Gabriel Rockhill's article on Zizek, I mean, he definitely makes a few really funny jokes about Zizek in that one, so. All right. So money necessarily crystallizes out of the process of exchange. So there's this word crystallize, and I actually have been wanting to investigate this further at one point. So, oh, it's even more interesting in German. So in German, is that the right side of it? It's, where is it? Der Geldkristall. So the gold crystal. So money necessarily crystallizes out of the process of exchange. So I'm interested in this because I know there was like, they're reading cell theory right now. They're reading biology, and there's just been this advancement where they first developed cell theory and this theory that the body is made of cells. And Marx and Engels are writing back and forth about this. And they're like, Hegel would have loved this to me. Too bad Hegel didn't live to see cell theory because it's so dialectical. And so Marx is really thinking about the logic of cells when writing Capital. And one of the cell theories that was floating around, which I think got abandoned, was used as the language of crystallization. So there was like movement, and then the movement would like crystallize into a shape or something like that. I don't know exactly how the theory worked, but I thought it would be interesting to go look at it and see at some point in the future whether or not you can find some of the logic of capital in there that Marx is drawing off. But okay, money necessarily crystallizes out of the process of exchange, which is, I guess, is the topic here. Austausch processes, which is the processes of exchange, it should say, actually, in which different products of labor are in fact, wait, no, it's singular, it's just genitive, my bad, in which different products of labor are in fact equated with each other, and thus converted into commodities. So there's a process of exchange. The commodities are put into relationship to each other, that whole like bartering system, and then built up out of that, money crystallizes. But it's like the exchange process that turns them into commodities, and then money crystallizes out of it. But then Marx said earlier that they don't confront each other as commodities without the general relative form. So, like, is that a contradiction? No, I think that there's like different like layers of temporal order and dependency here that are overlapping. Because we're not talking about things in the order of time. We're talking about the logical stages of development. And remember, he said, like, let's look at things more closely. Okay, so the historical broadening and deepening of the phenomenon of exchange develops the opposition. So then we have another dialectical opposition here between use value and value, which is latent in the nature of the commodity. Right, so that's I think it was Lenin who said, like, in his reading of Capital, that there's like this fundamental tension that everything develops out of. Everything can be seen out of that contradiction between use value and value. The need to give an external expression to this opposition. So that's something that happens in Hegel too, where like you have an internal opposition, and then it expresses itself externally. So the need to give an external expression to this opposition for the purposes of commercial intercourse produces the drive towards an independent form of value, which finds neither rest nor peace till an independent form has been achieved, but the differentiation of commodity into commodities and money. There's a few words for difference in German, so I'm just curious about what that is. That is interesting. So it's Verdopplung, doubling, basically. The doubling of commodities into commodities and money. Ooh, that's interesting too, because think about this. Commodities doubles into commodities and money. So this is like, again, to that thing about money being both a commodity and not a commodity, and it's like contradictory character. It's because it's based off this splitting on the commodity of itself. Like the commodity, like a cell, splits into commodity and money. Like it's out of this inner opposition within the commodity. It becomes this external opposition of commodities and money. I mean, this is what Sean Hippolyte, the guy who wrote Genesis and Structure of the Phenomenology of Spirit, which is like one of the best commentaries on Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, said that there's like no better reader of Hegel than Marx. Like to actually be able to like work out things, thinking through this logic in this kind of way, and not like bullshit thesis, synthesis, but to actually recognize the movement and things like this, I think takes like somebody who actually has to like be part of the movement of Hegel's thought and then think something in that movement somewhere else. So, I mean, this is like pretty cool. Okay, so yeah, and then like this whole idea of like drive being rooted in this opposition between use value and value. I hope we're not getting like too woohoo dialectics. This is just stuff that like, I really like. So, at the same rate then, as the transformation of the products of labor into commodities is accomplished, one particular commodity is transformed into money. Okay, so I would say you do not need Hegel to... So Lenin said you need to understand Hegel to fully understand Marx. I don't think you need to understand Hegel to understand Marx, just to get every little piece of it. So what's going on here, let me like summarize it and stop nerding out, because I'm actually trying to find like how Marx arrived at his conclusions, but I think you can understand his logic and understand his conclusions without getting into the weeds of the dialectic. But basically, like we've seen, commodities have this dual character. You can sell them or you can use them, right? That's an opposition. And whenever things are traded, they flip those poles. Like one becomes the use, one becomes the exchange, one becomes the exchange, one becomes the use, and which one is which? They both are each, but for the perspective of the other, like buyer and the other seller. But money becomes this like way of commercial interstate. There's a drive towards value having this independent form. Like money is something that like takes that side of the opposition where there's the commodities are measuring each other, right? So like this jacket is worth 20 yards of wool or whatever, right? Like the jacket's measuring the wool's measuring the jacket, but they're like each measuring each other but can't measure each other at the same time. That whole tension gets like pulled out of just the kind of battle of exchange between the commodities and put into this external thing of money. So that money is now the value form. So instead of me being like, I have my wool, I need those coats, because the wool is both use and exchange, I now just have money. And money kind of like rips the value out of the commodities and puts it somewhere where we can just like all see it, if that makes sense. I know that sounds a little bit like more mystical, but like that's kind of what he's trying to say here, and it does make sense in a very Hegelian way too. All right, so let's go to the next part. The direct exchange of products has the form of the simple expression of value in one respect, but not in another. Okay. That form was X commodity A equals Y commodity B. Yeah, money exactly resolves a conflict within the commodity. Although, as we'll see, it has its own tension. The form of direct exchange products is X use value A is Y use value B. The articles A and B in this case are not yet commodities, but become so only through the act of exchange. Yeah, because they would be just use values on their own. The first way which an object of utility attains the possibility of becoming an exchange value is to exist as a non-use value, as a quantum of use value superfluous to the immediate needs of its owner. Yes, if you have too much of something, it could become something you can exchange, right? You order something, get two of it, now you can get rid of one somehow. Things are in themselves external to man and therefore alienable. Let's check that. Dinge sind an und für sich der Menschen außerlich und daher veräußerlich. So, an und für sich is like in and for itself in Hegel. So there's like in itself, which is like implicit, and there's like for itself, which is like how it looks on the surface as opposed to how it is on the like inside or implicit or like kind of like underneath the surface side. In and for itself is when it like is both implicit and explicit. It's not just like on the surface, but it's on the surface as it is in reality, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if it matters for really understanding the sentence, but you know, it's nice to flag the terms when they come up. And alienable is here is it's not alienable in the sense of alienation, but it's veräußerlich. So it's like more like alienable in the sense of like it's externalizable, but one can like release it. In order that this alienation, Veräußerung. So that's to flag that he's not talking about alienation in the sense of like Entfremdung, which would be alienation in the sense of like the 1844 manuscripts. Although there might be like overlap between these two. If you look at like some of the stuff about the Entäußerung, the externalization of like thought, like from like Feuerbach or like his writings on Hegel, where like God or the absolute is this kind of externalization. There is that sense in Äußerung, but not. It doesn't have the sense of alienation in the sense of like the Marxist sense of being alienated from labor. Okay, so in order that this alienation may be reciprocal, Oh yeah, yeah. And alienation is also just like, um, you're like freeing yourself. Not freeing yourself. What's the word I'm looking for? You're like relieving yourself of your product. You're like saying like, I give this to you, like I alienate it from myself. Like it has that sense to it. And I think this is actually language from Hegel's philosophy of right too, which I need to go back and keep working on. So I haven't done much on Hegel's political philosophy, but okay. So in order that this alienation may be reciprocal, it is only necessary for men to agree tacitly to treat each other as the private owners of those alienable things, and precisely for that reason as persons who are independent of each other. Okay. So you have to have some assumption of ownership of things here. But this relationship, like it can't be a communal situation with everything shared. But this relationship of reciprocal isolation and foreignness does not exist for the members of a primitive community of natural origin, whether it takes the form of a patriarchal family, an ancient Indian commune, or an Inca state. Yeah, that's what I just said. But foreignness is, I just saw that when I was looking up here, Fremdheit. So it does have that's more in the sense of alienation, but here it just is like alien in the sense of foreign. Um, and reciprocal isolation here is wechselseitige Verhaltnis. Or no, it's a wechselseitige Fremdheit, so reciprocal foreignness actually too is maybe better here. Yeah, so the exchange of commodities begins where commodities have their boundaries at their points of contact with other commodities or with members of the latter. That's interesting. So it's like an den Punkten ihres Kontakt, so like the point of contact, literally. But it doesn't say have their boundaries. Have their boundaries would be interesting, but it just says begins at their point of contact. Oh wait, no, the exchange of commodities begins where commodities have their boundaries. I didn't see that here. Oh, so wo die Gemeinwesen enden. So it's like at their end. However, as soon as products have become commodities in the external relations of a community, they also, by reaction, become commodities in the internal life of the community. So if you have commodities, right? Because there could be a community that like does communal production, but then takes some of the things that are communally produced and sells them to on the market. And then it says that by reaction, they become commodities within the community, right? Because you're externalizing things, but then there's like a commodities coming in, I think. Their quantitative exchange relation is at first determined purely by chance. They become exchangeable through the mutual desire of their owners to alienate them. In the meantime, the need for others' objects of utility gradually establishes itself. The constant repetition of exchange makes it a normal social process. In the course of time, therefore, at least some part of the products must be produced intentionally for the purpose of exchange. From that moment, the distinction between the usefulness of things for direct consumption and the usefulness in exchange becomes firmly established. Their use value becomes distinguished from their exchange value. On the other hand, the quantitative proportion in which things are exchangeable becomes dependent on their production itself. Custom fixes their values at definite magnitudes. So, first he says that it's fixed by custom, but then he also says that the quantitative proportion is dependent on production. But notice that he's talking about commodities at like very early ancient society at this moment, right? So it's not that commodities, this is going to get me in trouble with any left comms here, but like, because sometimes there's arguments about this from like certain Western Marxists, but I mean, that's what this says here. He seems to be talking about ancient communities, and they have commodity exchange. Maybe it's just external with like other groups, but it's not like there is no commodity exchange here. and it has some customary basis for definite magnitudes, but also is dependent on production itself. So there is use value and exchange value already, which makes sense because Aristotle's talking about it. In the direct exchange of products, each commodity is a direct means of exchange to its owner, and an equivalent to those who do not possess it, although only insofar as it has use value for them. At this stage, therefore, the articles exchanged do not acquire a value form independent of their own use value or of the individual needs of the exchangers. So the value form is not independent of their own use value or of the individual needs, meaning that it's still The need for this form first develops with the increase in the number and variety of the commodities entering into the process of exchange. The problem and means for its solution arise immediately. Commercial intercourse in which the owners of commodities exchange and compare their own articles with various other articles never takes place unless different kinds of commodities belonging to different owners are exchanged for and equated as values with one single further kind of commodity. So basically, when he talks about a value form independent of their own use value, I don't think he's saying that there is no value form at this point. What he's saying is that the use value serves as the equivalent to the value of the other commodity. So there's no money. That would be a value form independent of the use value of each commodity. The need for this form first develops with the increase. Okay, we read that. This further commodity, by becoming the equivalent of various other commodities, directly acquires the form of a universal social equivalent, if only within narrow limits. So it's going to be money. The universal equivalent form comes and goes with the momentary social contacts which call it into existence. It is transiently attached to this or that commodity in alteration. So he's saying that, like, at this stage, there are occasionally things that become universal equivalents based off the needs of society, but there's no fixed money form yet. It could be gold, it could be iron, it could be brass, it could be bronze. But there's like a need to measure things in a certain thing. When maybe there's like a big trade or something like that, be like, you give me like whatever grains worth of cows or whatever, right? But that's not fixed yet. It comes and goes. I need to get some water, so I'm going to pause here for just a second. All right, I'm back. Okay. But with the development of exchange, it fixes itself firmly and exclusively onto particular kinds of commodity. That is, it crystallizes out into the money form. The particular kind of commodity to which it sticks is at first a matter of accident. Nevertheless, there are two circumstances which are by and large decisive. The money form comes to be attached either to the most important articles of exchange from outside, which are in fact the primitive and spontaneous forms of manifestation of the exchange value of local products, or the objects of utility, which forms the chief element of indigenous alienable wealth, for example, cattle. So like cattle could be a money form. Nomadic peoples are the first to develop the money form because all their worldly possessions are in a movable and therefore directly alienable form, and because their mode of life, by continually bringing them into contact with foreign communities, encourages the exchange of products. I mean, like, how did people read this and think Marx is like, oh, the commodity form only exists in capitalism? And he's like, nomadic tribes trading cattle, right? Men have often made man himself into the primitive material of money in the shape of the slave, but they could have never done this with the land and the soil. So even slaves can serve as a money form. Such an idea could only arise in bourgeois society, and one which was already well developed. So only bourgeois society could like see that land is literally like a money form. Fucking bourgeoisie, right? It dates from the last third of the 7th century. The first attempt to implement the idea on a national scale was made a century later during the French bourgeois revolution. So there was some idea of like actually putting money into land. So I'm gonna look at the questions real quick. Yeah, so I don't think it's necessarily that he's talking about shells or sticks, um, because he's still talking about a commodity being like that takes labor to like produce being used as the commodity form. He's not talking yet about money that's a symbol, all right? So like gold coins, he's not talking about like dollar bills yet, but he's talking about like things that have some kind of commodity value in terms of labor time. But I don't know. Maybe shells and sticks would be an example of them. I've never really done a deep dive into like what old money looked like, but it'd be interesting to do. I do have a friend who's a Marxist anthropologist, but she mainly studies like women in like uncontacted tribes and history and stuff like that. Yeah, I think at this stage we're talking about what's being exchanged still having a use value to some degree. In the same proportion as exchange bursts in its local bonds, and the value of commodities accordingly expands more and more into the material embodiment of human labor as such, in that proportion does the money form become transferred to commodities which are by nature fitted to perform the social function of a universal equivalent. These commodities are the precious metals. And so precious metals, which is kind of going to be where it ends, right? Because Marx, during his time, like there were certainly like banknotes and stuff, but they represented precious metals. We still got a gold standard. So eventually people figure out, yeah, precious metals makes the most sense. The truth of the statement that although gold and silver are not by nature money, money is by nature gold and silver, is shown by the appropriateness of their natural properties for the functions of money. So far, however, we are acquainted with only one function of money, namely to serve as the form of appearance, the shining form of the value of commodities, that is, as the material in which the magnitudes of their value are socially expressed. We talked about that in the last chapter. Only a material whose every sample possesses the same uniform quality can be an adequate form of appearance of value, that is, a material embodiment of the abstract and therefore equal human labor. So again, as soon as like currency is being introduced, it seems that it's a material embodiment of abstract and therefore equal labor. So there, I don't know. There was a debate I was having on TikTok today, and you can see it in the posts about some people who are there's an argument. I think it comes from like Pistone and some other people that abstract human labor only appears within capitalist society. Yet it seems that Marx is talking about like when money first appeared in like ancient Greece and stuff, right? And so like here it would seem that gold is a material, it's being chosen as a standard because it can like embody abstract equal labor for reason we'll get to in just a second. On the other hand, since the difference between the magnitudes of value is purely quantitative, the muddy commodity must be capable of purely quantitative differentiation. It must therefore be divisible at will, and also must be possible to assemble it again for its components parts. So because you can break up gold into like equal parts, that's why gold ends up being a money commodity. Like you can't be like, here's a cow, let's like chop up some change, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. You don't have a cow anymore. But you can like break gold if there's like change involved. Gold and silver possess these properties by nature. So people land up on gold and silver because it's easy to break them into like components that can be used to measure the value of things. That's the theory here. The money commodity acquires dual use value. And this is going to get into like some of the cool contradictions that pop up here. But like money has the double use value. It has these alongside its special use value as a commodity. Gold, for instance, serves to fill hollow teeth, forms the raw material for luxury articles, right? Like you got your bling, whatever. But it's also formal use value arising out of its specific social function, right? So it's like money, and it's it can be weighed too. Yeah, it's money, and it's gold, like at once. All right. It has the use of being money and the use of being a commodity. Since all other commodities are merely particular equivalents for money, the latter being the universal equivalent, they relate to money as particular commodities relate to a universal commodity. So that means that the price of gold is going to be affected both by its commodification and by its role as the universal equivalent. We've seen that the money form is merely the reflection thrown upon a single commodity by the relations between all other commodities. Let's look that up. Excuse me. Widerspiegelung. So, like, mirroring back, literally. Reflection, yeah. Basically, yep, pretty literal. Thrown upon a single commodity by the relations between all other commodities, right? So you have all the other commodities, they all relate to each other, and then they all, like, throw that relation back onto money, and the money expresses it. The money is a commodity, and there is a commodity. That money is a commodity, is therefore only a discovery for those who proceed from its finished shape in order to analyze it afterwards. Right? And so that's Marx's whole thing about the mystery of money, is that people start with money and try to figure out what it is. They don't build the logic of money out. Although I think it's fair to say that money is both is and is not a commodity. Although I don't remember if he mentions it here. I know he mentions it in Grundrisse. Because it's not just a commodity. The process of exchange gives to the commodity which it has converted into money, not its value, but its specific value form. Yeah, the specific value form involving money, which is like commodity, money, commodity. Confusion between these two attributes has misled some writers into maintaining that the value of gold and silver is imaginary. So that's like the crazy thing about like Marxism is like people are like have this kind of naive idea of Marxism about a lot of things too, like that Marxists like don't like to have nice things, right? Because you're like, oh, isn't that so materialistic? It's like, no, I'm trying to like I'm trying to have nice things, right? You know, and that's been a rumor since like the Paris Commune. Like during the Paris Commune, they actually made luxury goods just to like defeat the rumor. It's like, no, we don't want to make everybody poor. We want to make everybody prosperous. But here's another thing: is like people think like Marxists think that money and like gold and silver that's just made up. It's like, nope, it's not. Like it does have value. It's like grounded in this very, very complicated relationship of why money is actually has value. It's not imaginary. The fact that money can, in certain functions, be replaced by mere symbols of itself gave rise to another mistaken notion that itself is a mere symbol. So yeah, you can have a symbol of money. That would be like a banknote, right? And so people were like, "Oh, these banknotes we just made up that they have value." But Marx says that's wrong too. Nevertheless, this error did contain a suspicion that the money form of the thing is external to the thing itself, being simply the form of appearance of human relations hidden behind it. That would be, right, that there's fetishism here. Right? And so when people say like, oh, money's just made up, or oh, money's just a mere symbol of value, like just because we think it symbolizes value, but it's not really valuable, there is an inkling of truth in this, which is that this is fetishism, because it's not the money, it's how money plays a role in a social relationship that appears as a relationship between things, but it is in fact, underneath that relationship between things, a relationship between people. I feel like this reading of this reading of Capital is the one that I paid attention to fetishism the most. I don't think I've like, because people talk about it so much, I don't think I was as fixated on it at previous times that I've read this book, but I've been thinking about it a lot this time. In this sense, every commodity is a symbol. That's always like the Marx move, right? As a good dialectician. It's like, people say money's a symbol. He's like, well, really, every commodity is a symbol. Just like he said, like, you know, people think money is mysterious, but they don't recognize how every commodity is mysterious. In this sense, every commodity is a symbol, since as value, it is only the material shell of the human labor expended on it. Right? But if it is declared that the social characteristics assumed by material objects, or the material characteristics assumed by social determination of labor on the basis of a definite mode of production are mere symbols, so that would be fetishism. Social characteristics are assumed by material objects, right? We trade things and they're social with each other. It's like the things are chatting with each other. Marx likes to play with that. That's what fetishism makes it look like. Or the material characteristics assumed by social determinations of labor on the basis of definite mode of production are mere symbols. Then it is also declared at the same time that these are the characteristics. These characteristics are the arbitrary product of human reflection. So that was something else that someone said. That was just like kind of like arbitrary. So reflection here is probably not the last kind of reflection. But willkürliches Gedankenprodukt der Menschen. So like willkürlich is like arbitrary, like just like kind of at the whim of the will. And then Gedankenprodukt is just like a product of like thinking or like kind of like mulling over, like thinking but not really in the like deep sense, but like kind of just thought product. This was the explanation favored by the 18th century. In this way, the Enlightenment endeavored, at least temporarily, to remove the appearance of strangeness from the mysterious shapes assumed by human relations whose origins they were unable to decipher. It's so cool to think about. Like, yeah, there's something very strange about how we're relating to each other. Den Rätselhaften, so like riddle, like Rätsel is like, I believe the word riddle. So like Rätselhaft, enigmatic. So yeah, riddle filled almost. That's the shapes, I think. Yeah, and then strangeness is Fremdheit. So it is like related to the. It's like related to the word alienation. Comes from the word alien or stranger. It has already been remarked above that the equivalent form of a commodity does not imply that the magnitude of its value can be determined. Therefore, even if we know that gold is money, and consequently directly exchangeable with all other commodities, this still does not tell us how much 10 pounds of gold is worth, for instance. Money, like every other commodity, cannot express the magnitude of its value except relatively to other commodities, right? Right? So then that's that thing I talked about before, and I'm sorry for using a pretentious Derridian constructive term for this, but there's no auto-affection for money in the sense that money can't measure itself, right? You can't be like, how many dollars is $20 worth? It's worth 20, right? So money, just like every other commodity, has to express its value in something else. This value that it expresses relative to everything else is determined by the labor time required for its production, and is expressed in the quantity of any other commodity in which the same amount of labor time is congealed. So the price of gold, and hence the money objectified in that gold, depends on the labor time that it takes to make the gold, to find the gold. And I think, like, I don't know, I remember in David Harvey's Capital course that he talked something about like how part of Nixon moving money off the gold standard had something to do with like new gold mines in South Africa and like the money price tanking or something along these lines. This establishing of its relative value occurs at the source of its production by means of barter. As soon as it enters into circulation as money, its value is already given. In the last decades of the 17th century, the first step in the analysis of money, the discovery that money is a commodity, had already been taken. But this is merely the first step and nothing more. The difficulty lies not in comprehending that money is a commodity, but discovering how, why, and by what means a commodity becomes money. So that's the move. It's not just like, oh, money's a commodity like anything else. It can be bought and sold because it can be traded, right? Like money fits into it has the role of money, but also the role of the commodity. Marx says the hard thing to figure out is not that money is a commodity, but how a commodity becomes money. How far do we have to go? All right, we've got one last paragraph. We've already seen from the simplest expression of value, x commodity A equals y commodity B, that the thing in which the magnitude of the value of another thing is represented appears to have the equivalent form independently of this relation, as a social property inherent in its nature. We followed the process by which this false semblance, let's see what that is. Falsion shines. So it's that word shine that we talked about, that's illusion, but it's even emphatically a false semblance now. A process which was completed when the universal equivalent form became identified with the natural form of a particular commodity, thus crystallized into the money form. So the false semblance is that the that value appears as a property of a thing. It's fetishism again. We follow the process by this false semblance became firmly established, a process which was completed when the universal equivalent form became identified with the natural form of a particular commodity and thus crystallized in the money form. What appears to happen is not that a particular commodity becomes money because all other commodities express their values in it, but on the contrary, that all other commodities universally express their values in a particular commodity because it becomes money. Because it is money. I remember this passage puzzling me for last time. For a minute. But the word here is shine. So appears to happen is shine. I'm gonna just mark that in my German real quick. Or sorry, my English copy. So he's talking about the logic of fetishism here, I think. The movement through which this process has been mediated vanishes in its own result, leaving no trace behind. That's a very dialectical move. Okay. Yeah. All right. So what something is money because all the commodities express their value in it, but it appears to be the case that all the commodities express their value in the money because it's money. And the movement through which a commodity has stepped out of the chain of commodities and become the money vanishes in the result, leaving no trace behind. So now we just see things in terms of money. Be like, oh, these things all express their values in money because that's money. Right? Money be green. Without any initiative on their part, the commodities find their own value configuration ready to hand. So the money starts to appear as just something like natural, almost like natural, and without us thinking about this like dialectical result that concretized it, that whole like process of building money out of the bartering exchanges like sublates itself and vanishes into its own result, and money appears as just something at hand, and the commodities appear as things that cost the money. And notice, even when billing it out, just for simplicity's sake, I had to use money expressions to explain the values of things. That's like how natural money is after it's dialectically developed itself out of barter. Without any initiative on their part, the commodities find their own value configuration ready to hand. There's this thing, money, that we can just express these values in the form of a physical commodity existing outside, but also alongside them. So there's some more of the kind of contradictory nature of money getting hinted at. I feel like Grunressa might talk more about it, but we'll see the next chapter is going to be on money. This physical object, gold or silver in its crude state, becomes immediately, on its emergence from the bowels of the earth, the direct incarnation of all human labor. So money is the direct incarnation of all human labor, hence the magic of money. Men are henceforth related to each other in their social process of production in a purely atomistic way. Their own relations of production therefore assume a material shape which is independent of their control and their conscious individual action. This situation is manifested first from the fact that the products of men's labor universally takes on the form of commodities. The riddle of the money fetish is therefore the riddle of the commodity fetish, now become visible and dazzling to our eyes. There's a lot in that. So the last sentence I think we can make sense of. So the riddle of the money fetish, right? Like, what is it? Is it in Gulliver's Travels where he meets the horses who are like think money is stupid and like why do humans go after money and fetishize it, right? And like that's the money fetish. And Marx says the money fetish riddle, that's just the commodity fetish. It's the same fetish. And things take on a power. Money becomes this thing that like has its own logic to it, independently of human control. We can't just like force money to stay where we want, right? Like we try with monetary policy and stuff like that, but it takes on this role independent of our existence. It's like the idea of like the species becomes not just the thing that expresses everything in it, but is also a member. It's like the set that includes itself. Like, because money is the measure of everything, yet in a weird way, it's its own thing with its own logic doing its own thing. I'm not sure how this leads to the atomistic way of the social production, but I think just because the relations of production assume a material shape which is independent of their control, that's money doing its thing. But like it makes them atomistic because it makes them atomistic because instead of being part of a communal project, they are instead just working for money. I don't think we're at wages and wage labor proper yet. That's going to take the development of actual capital, which we haven't even gotten close to yet. Maybe it's soon. It takes a while before we can even develop this all into like actual capital. Maybe it's in the next chapter. But I think this has been really fascinating, though. I forgot that all this cool stuff was in this chapter. That's the end of the chapter. The next chapter is money, or the circulation of commodities. And so we're going to talk about gold and money and how it circulates. And it's going to be fun. And I forget if we get the actual, like if we get to any, I'm going to get some quotes from Dante's Inferno in here, and then, or Dante's Commedia. Oh yeah, there's really cool stuff in the money chapter. It's great. There's going to be dialectics. There's going to be dialectics of nature in here. Like we're going to talk about dialectics of nature and like planetary orbits and stuff. Probably not all in this. Probably be a few different chapters. Oh, he quotes Heraclitus. I noticed this when teaching the pre-Socratics. I taught like every pre-Socratic fragment, and I didn't know that Marx quoted it because I read that it was like, oh my gosh, it's the value form in Heraclitus. I have to look at that note on my own time. Anyways, thank y'all for joining. Dialectics hour and 15 minutes. This is a fun chapter. Tune in again. We'll do the money chapter, probably the first section of it, because I think it's quite detailed. And I will see y'all next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Thanks for tuning in.